Hello and welcome to our next episode, our next issue. And today we're going to be discussing extremism. As you can see on the screen, uh, we are going to be discussing extremism. And let me see what I'm doing here. Okay, so many of you know that I was involved in a panel discussion at the University of Texas Permian Basin a couple weeks ago called Racial Reconciliation, and a few people asked me to do an in-depth lecture on extremism and how and why people join extremist groups and hate groups. This idea is that my presentation from a couple weeks ago was only 20 minutes long, and I didn't get to get into extreme detail and get into all of the things that I really wanted to in that discussion. So a few of my students have asked me to create this extended lecture, which I'm doing, and it will be placed within Canvas, and it will be placed on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and like. And let's get into the world of things. What has to happen before you can get into any discussion on hate, extremism, racism, hate groups? You have to define your terms. And the first term that I want to discuss, the first term I want to talk about is racism. Racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or group of people based upon their membership to any particular racial or ethnic group. Typically, one that is a minority group or a group that's marginalized. And this whole idea of racism has expanded and it has gone beyond looking at people and judging people based solely upon the color of their skin. And now it's also, racism has also included the LGBTQI plus P community. It has gone into anti-Semitism. It has expanded into gender prejudice. And all of this is bigotry, actually. Where racism itself, and the original definition of racism, was specifically dedicated to judging people based upon the color of their skin, through their race or their ethnic or origins. And white supremacy is another term that has been moving around, has been going throughout the country, throughout the world. We've been hearing a lot about white supremacy and how our country, the United States of America, has been systemically racist, and that the entire country system has been built around this idea of white supremacy. So let's define white supremacy, because it needs to be defined, because its use, its application in the world today does not meet or match the term white supremacy. I know when I was growing up, the most horrible thing that you could be called was a pedophile, somebody who, like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and apparently Prince Andrew, and people within the Clinton circles, apparently, enjoy having sexual relations with children. That's changed. I know in the early or late 1990s, early 2000s, the worst label that could be placed upon you was being a racist. Now the worst label that can be placed upon you is called white supremacy. If people disagree with you, people don't like what you have to say, they're going to label you as a white supremacist. So the definition of a white supremacist is the belief that white people, specifically white people, constitute a superior race and should dominate society. typically to the exclusion and or detriment to other racial ethnic groups. In particular, white supremacists target Black, African Americans, Blacks, Hispanics, and Jewish people as being subhuman, as not being superior, not being of the Aryan nations and the Aryan races. And because they're not part of the Aryan nations, they should be excluded from society. And that's a power, in my opinion, that's a very powerful definition. But what we're hearing, and the use of the term white supremacy, is being thrown all over the place. Larry Elder went up against Governor Newsom in California, and because Larry Elder was a Republican, Newsom, the old white guy, said, hey, look at this. This is the black face of white supremacy. Okay? He's black. He tried to become governor. He does not believe that white people constitute a superior race and should dominate society. He believes in equality. You know, the idea of white supremacy in itself goes against the whole idea of Martin Luther King's dream, which was one day my children and your children will be able to live together in harmony. And we will no longer judge people based upon the color of their skin, but upon the content of their character. Here recently in the Virginia elections, the lieutenant governor, Winsome Sears, won the office of the lieutenant governor. If you would listen to the left-leaning media, you would think that Winsome Sears was just another white supremacist, another white person that's wanting to keep black people down. But if you did a little further, because I know the hosts there at The View, it wasn't Whoopi Goldberg herself, but it was one of the others, had stated that, you know, Winsome Sears was a reflection of white supremacy within our country, and her election is just a dog whistle to unite the white supremacy movement around the world. Now, if you did a little more research, you'd find that Winsome Sears is a black immigrant to this country from Jamaica who got her citizenship and became a United States Marine. She is pro Second Amendment. She carries an AR-15. She's a hero of the conservative movement, regardless of the color of her skin. It's her policies. But the way that we have turned this phrase, this term, this white supremacy into anything that is opposed to the narrative of the liberal, progressive, leftist, Democrat narrative, gets labeled as a white supremacist, even if that individual was not white. You know, so it's a little scary. The next term I want to discuss, and one of my students stated that I rushed this term, I rushed my examples when I was giving my presentation a couple of weeks ago. But aversive racism, in my opinion, aversive racism is the most dangerous type of racism, in that aversive racism is a form of racial prejudice felt by individuals who outwardly endorse the egalitarian attitudes and values, but nonetheless experience negative emotions in the presence of members of certain racial groups. Some people might want to call this reverse racism, but it's not really reverse racism. The particularly ambiguous circumstances For example, if a white employer supports the equality of non-white employees and non-white candidates, but they hire whites over black candidates in job interviews, when all the individual qualifications for the positions are unclear or they're identical, he or she is demonstrate, and then they pick the white person over the people of color. That is aversive racism. But in addition to this idea of aversive racism, is the thought or the idea that we need equality. We need to overstep equality to receive equity, because the people of color are unable to obtain it on their own. It's a concept that's been identified as throttling down competence. Okay, and what we've found in a recent study that's about to be published, it's in press right now, and let me see if I can find that citation. No, I can't find that citation. But it was by two authors and two researchers, one from Yale University and the other from Purdue. I think it was Purdue. But they have found that white liberals lack confidence in the competency of people of color, so they're going to throttle down their vocabulary, throttle down their expectations when they are discussing or talking to people of color. Okay, so another example of aversive racism is voter ID. We have heard over, I want to say almost a decade now, that voter ID is racist and that we can't have voter ID in our world because voter ID is racism, and it's systemic racism, and it is a continuation of the poll taxes, and it's a continuation of the subjection and oppression of the African American population. Why, you ask? Well, according to Joseph Biden, according to Lamont Hill, according to Representative Jackson, Sheila Jackson Lee, I think her name is, down in the Houston area, and the opponents of voter ID, is that people of color are incapable of getting an identification card. They call it a poll tax because you have to pay $10 to get an ID, a picture, an official state picture ID. So they're bringing up all of these comments that it is that the African American population or the people of color within our country are incapable of being able to get a ID. I know President Biden stated a few months ago that people of color don't know where the DMV is in order to get a voter ID. Another example that we can find of aversive racism, and you tell me, you can mention in the comments below, which is more racist? That we need to shut down the welfare system in the United States because it is only promoting laziness? Is that a racist comment? Or is the racist comment, which we hear coming from the liberal left, that we can't get rid of the welfare system because the minority populations in our country depend upon that welfare to continue with their life. Okay. The minority population, and I quote Vice President Kamala Harris in stating that we can't get rid of the welfare system because the Black, Indigenous, people of color, also known as BIPOCs, are incapable of surviving without welfare. They have to have welfare just to live their lives. And they can't have any quality of life unless they're on the plantation and unless they're on this government dole, because they can't do it by themselves. I think what Kamala Harris said was more racist than Donald Trump saying, well, we need to get rid of the welfare program and the welfare system. So aversive racism, in my opinion, is the very most dangerous form of racism because they patronize the Black, Indigenous, people of color, and to make them say that, you know, equity is a good thing. Well, they're wanting you to believe that equity is a good thing because those people that believe in white fragility and those people that believe in white privilege and those people that believe in the oppression of the Black, Indigenous, people of color, they believe that they are incapable of maintaining this standard of white expectation, quote unquote. So let's move on to systemic racism. And this is, you know, one of the issues that we have found, and we've heard it a lot since the Rittenhouse verdict came back and Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all counts. And even before that, probably since Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, I want to say that was back in 2012. But the acquittal and the fact that they didn't charge and they didn't send Zimmerman to prison for killing Trayvon Martin is what created the Black Lives Matters movement. And we started hearing about systemic racism. And, oh, what's her name? Michelle Alexander. And let me pull these two books out. Michelle Alexander and Glenda Elizabeth Gilmore have, and the founders of Black Lives Matter and a whole lot of people, Cornel West and a whole lot of others, have set up this systemic racism, and it's been accepted by the white liberals and the leftists within our country as a reality. But systemic racism is a form of racism that is embedded in the laws and regulations of the national, the federal, the state, the local governments, or the policies and procedures that have been established by society or a specific organization. So, you know, and I heard Ben Shapiro talking about this on one of his YouTube videos the other day. Systemic racism may have existed, you know, and I'm going off of what Ben Shapiro didn't discuss this a whole lot, I think. But let me start over. Does racism exist in the United States? Yes, it does. Individually, racism exists, and it is probably at pandemic proportions. Does aversive racism exist in this country? Yes, it does. Does white supremacy exist in this country? Yes, it does. We can expand the white supremacy definition to racial supremacy, and then you can take the racial, let me back up a few slides. Okay, and you can take the idea of supremacy and the belief that any specific race, white, black, Asian, Native American, Jewish, any racial or ethnic group believes that their group constitutes a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other races or ethnic groups. That is a supremacy group. Does this exist within the United States? Yes, it does. Does aversive racism exist in the United States? Yes, it does. And I believe that it exists more predominantly within the leftist progressive movements than what you'll find within the conservative movements and the Republican movements. So let's now get back to systemic racism. Systemic racism is a form of racism that's embedded in the laws and regulations of the national, federal, state, local governments, and or the policies and procedures of society or the specific organizations. So what laws are there? Okay, in order to be able to claim that systemic racism exists in this country, exists within the United States, you have to point to an existing law that promotes racism. I'll wait a second. Okay, if you can identify a specific law that promotes racism, that is in law, in practice in the United States today, please list it below. If you can identify a policy or procedure that is generally accepted within an organization within the United States, okay, not within the Ku Klux Klan, not within the hate groups or extremist groups, if through a non-governmental institution or an agency, a college, a country club, a business like Amazon or Yahoo or Walmart, what are these policies that they promote, and that you can put it in writing, that there is something in writing that states we will prefer this race over any others. If you can't do that, systemic racism doesn't exist. Ben Shapiro does not believe systemic racism exists. Has systemic racism existed in the past? Yes, it has. Through Jim Crow, the Jim Crow laws, the poll taxes. There's a lot of things throughout our history that don't exist anymore. You know, the first line of our Constitution is, in order to create a more perfect union, we the people, ... Okay, so our country's not perfect, and it hasn't been perfect. Our Constitution was created in such a way that it'll allow the country, through evolving standards of morality, through evolving standards of ethics, we can overcome the racist policies and the racist ideas within our country. But these terms like white supremacy and systemic racism and racism itself have been turned into slurs, no different than the N-word describing Black people, or the K-word describing Jewish people, or the whole bunch of words that describe the Hispanic population coming across the southern border, or those words, those slurs that have been, used to identify Asian populations or even the white population. Okay, so these terms have meanings, and the attempts to use them as slurs instead of realities throttle down their meanings. They dilute the meanings that they have. So if you're calling everybody a white supremacist, or you're saying everything is systemically racist, it comes to a point where these words actually mean nothing at all. So let's move on to extremism. Okay, and that's what the whole topic is. I've been talking here for almost 30 minutes, and I haven't even gotten to extremism yet. So extremism is defined as the quality or state of being extreme. I hate it when people use the word in the definitions, Okay, so let's just erase that definition because it doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's the advocacy of extreme measures or views. Okay, here we go. It's another definition that uses the word extreme within the definition. If you're not going to define it without using the word, you're not telling anybody anything. So this term extremism is primarily used in a political or religious sense. It's to refer to an ideology that is considered by the speaker or a hearer that this idea is outside the mainstream attitudes. It doesn't conform with what society wants. It is on the fringes of the ideas. It's an ideology, it's a religion, it's a faith or a belief that is outside of what is considered or deemed acceptable. So if it is outside the mainstream attitudes of what is deemed as acceptable, you are hence an extremist. So an extremist is willing to use violence up to including terrorism to enforce the group ideas. Okay, most people that turn to extremism when they perceive, or most people will turn to extremism when they perceive that they've lost their own significance or they have become marginalized. Okay, and this is an important thing. When we're sitting here, and we'll get into the theories of extremism and how extremist groups are created and formed here in the next following slides. But you have to remember, when you are dealing with a group of people or an individual and you start calling them a white supremacist and you start calling them extremists and you start saying that they support systemic racism and you marginalize their ideas and you silence their ideas, you're going to create that person, or you're going to force that person to embrace those who they feel share the same ideas and thoughts that they do, pushing them or forcing them, knocking them out of the mainstream discussion and forcing them into the fringe, forcing them into the outside or the out group, and then creating and causing extremism. Okay, so when you're throwing these labels around, you're going to create that which you want to prevent. Extremist groups will take advantage of the self-perception of marginalization because you've marginalized this person, because you've belittled their thoughts, you've belittled their ideas. They're going to be embraced by the extremist groups, and then they're going to be sucked into this group. So before we can get into the theories, we need to talk about groupthink. Okay, groupthink is this phenomenon that exists within our society today. We can also label it and call it cancel culture. Okay, it's where people tend to conform with the in-group decisions to avoid punishment from the in-group, to avoid being outcast, to avoid being marginalized. Okay, you may not, as an individual, if you're stuck in this groupthink pattern, you as an individual may be stuck in this world of having to agree because you're afraid of being canceled. You're afraid of being sent to the out group. I can never remember the guy's name. I have to write it down. I'm going to use my phone to bring up his name. Let's see here. Host of Today Show. Canceled. Let's see if this comes up this way. Matt Lauer. Do you guys remember Matt Lauer? Matt Lauer was, what was Matt Lauer? Matt Lauer was caught up in the Me Too movement. He was accused of being sexually inappropriate with interns and people and women that worked with NBC, and then he was gone all of a sudden. He said all the right things. He was in the in group, but he said something offhanded that went against what the in group was saying. And then all of these women came up and said, look at Matt Lauer. He is this horrible person. He raped me. He sexually harassed me. And Matt Lauer was gone. Okay, so this idea of groupthink was introduced by Irving Janis. And he said that there were 8 symptoms of groupthink. But it's a psychological phenomenon that exists in which people strive for a consensus within the group, and then they silence anybody who dissents from the accepted narrative. Okay? In many cases, people will set aside their own personal beliefs, they'll set aside their own personal views, they'll adopt the opinion, and then they'll defend that opinion just to protect their place within the in-group. Groupthink may not always be easy to discern, but there are some signs that it's present. Janis suggested that groupthink happens when there's a strong, persuasive group leader, when there is a high level of group cohesion, and there's intense pressure from the outside to make a good decision. Okay. So, starting with the 8 symptoms, or the 8 things that identify groupthink. The first is an illusion of unanimity. Okay, the strong leader leads members to believe that everyone is in agreement. Everybody believes the same thing. Everybody thinks that it's the way that it's supposed to be. Everybody within the group agrees. And this idea is contagious, okay? Because this strong leader is going to turn around and he says, well, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so agree with me. Well, I was thinking the same thing. The staff's not going to like this, but I agree with it, and this needs to be done. Great minds think alike. Yeah, this was my idea too. I think this is a great idea. And this illusion becomes to where everybody, it becomes an echo chamber of yes men. Because you don't want to be considered unloyal or unfaithful. Okay? It leads members to ignore moral problems. It exists leaders to not consider the consequences of individual and group actions, because we are trying to promote our idea, and we want to make sure that everybody agrees with us. And you can't question me. Trust the science, says Mr. Fauci. I know I might be getting into areas where I might get rejected from YouTube, but this group think will focus on trust the science, trust the experts, trust what I'm saying. I have all of this stuff to back me up. You can't question this. Just get in line, stand in line. Follow what I'm telling you, because this is what the science says. Rationalizing or rationalization prevents members from reconsidering their own beliefs and causes them to ignore the warning signs that you're following into this type of extremist groupthink. You're stepping, you don't want to be punished. You don't want to fall into the out group. You don't want to become an outcast of society. So you're going to rationalize. Well, Dr. Fauci says this. Well, President Biden says this. Well, President Trump also says this. You know, while we're here, you know, you have to remember that the vaccine was developed by people under the Trump administration leadership, regardless of what's been going on. Okay, you know that this is a politicized issue. When President Trump developed this, his people developed the vaccine and then said, we all need to go get this vaccine. And President Biden and Vice President Harris stated, oh, we can't take this. It's too fast. It's too quick. It can't be trusted. It hasn't been tested. It's experimental. And then President Biden wins the election with 80 million votes. And now all of a sudden, he's losing patience with the people because they're not conforming. They're not doing what he says, which is to take President Trump's vaccine. And so this tells you that the whole shot is about political in-group and out-group. And we're rationalizing it. You know, it's now a pandemic of the unvaccinated because it's only the unvaccinated that are dying. I'm not going to question these. These are quotes. I'm not. Well, I am questioning the rationalization that we're seeing that's creating extremist groups. So then you move into stereotyping, and stereotyping leads members of the in-group to ignore and even demonize out-group members. Cass Sunstein, and I want to say his name is Mitch Glazier, had an article called Nudge Nudge. And this is about punishing in-group versus out-group. Okay, you ignore and demonize the out-group members. Okay, and we've seen this, and it's probably going to happen to me. If your article or if your presentation is questioned as being out-group and it doesn't conform to the chosen or accepted narrative, your voice is silenced. YouTube will demonetize you. Facebook will censor you. Twitter will cancel you. All of these groups will delete your channels. I know I had some questions and I questioned the science on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn profile. Well, not on my profile, but I made comments questioning the whole idea of the pandemic and the government actions to combat the pandemic. And my account was suspended for 2 weeks. Okay, and then we use stereotyping. You know, you're a white supremacist, you're a systemic racist, you're a racist, you're a pedophile, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're all of these things as a way to marginalize, to take away the significance of the individual, to silence them. So we're going to stereotype them. And those people, and we find it, you know, especially within the pandemic world, you know, in order to say things on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and some of these other societally accepted or socially accepted social network platforms, you have to self-censor. You know, you're constantly seeing people. You see me do that myself, and then you see people on the right constantly qualifying what they're having to say and self-censoring what they're having to say because they're afraid that they'll get a strike. They're afraid that they will lose their platform to spread their narrative, okay? Because their narrative doesn't fit what is being accepted as the acceptable narrative of the in-group. Then you are out, you're outcast, you are thrown out, you're canceled. Your membership and your platforms or your contribution to these platforms is terminated. And they say it's because you violated the terms of service. While people who promote violence and hate and stereotyping and maintain or support the accepted narrative, their voices aren't censored. Okay, so now you've got the Mindguards. The next group are the Mindguards. These Mindguards, who Janice back in the 70s called them Mindguards. Today, we can call them fact checkers. The fact checkers they act as self-appointed censors to hide problematic information, calling it misinformation or fake news. And they hide this information from the group because the extremist group does not want a dissenting voice to permeate the in-group. The information they keep quiet or they actively prevent sharing. I think that the term has been called shadow banning, where people are not going to be able to share a dissenting voice, okay? Because, it's just the way that it is. They're not going to be able to share this dissenting voice. They're, because, it's going to be silenced. Because if other people are given the ability to hear a dissenting voice, then the powerful leader at the top of this group will be unable to maintain control over the group and maintain control of the narrative. So these fact checkers are there to diminish the importance or to silence the importance of the dissenting voice. Okay, so the illusions of invulnerability, lead members of the group to be optimistic and engage in risk-taking when no one speaks out or there are no voices that pose an alternative opinion. Okay, it causes people to believe that the in-group must be right. And this whole idea suggests, as long as we can silence the opposing voice, as long as we can silence those dissenting opinions, then everybody will believe in the chosen narrative. Okay, so much so that even Superman, who is an alien life form, who cannot get sick. He can, the history of Superman says that he is invulnerable to any human disease. He is invulnerable to lead. He's invulnerable to anything on earth. He is the man of steel, capable of leaping tall buildings in a single bound. Has to wear a mask so he doesn't get COVID. Yeah, I said that. Superman, who is unable, invulnerable, he cannot get sick, wears a mask so he doesn't get sick, or so he doesn't spread the sickness around to other people. Making sense? So we have these group of people that are running around out there that are physically attacking others because they're not wearing a mask, because they don't have a shot, they don't have a vaccine. They are marginalizing, they are making outcasts of those people who want to question the science of the disease. Let's not have an open discussion. Let's not have a honest discussion. Let's start calling names. Let's start stereotyping. Let's start attacking. Let's start minimizing the significance of these other people. Okay. There is a need, this idea, to dealing with dissenters. The larger society at large, the society at large has this need to conform. And this need to conform is often placed on members who pose questions. Don't question, just get in line. Don't question. Don't. Get in line, get your shot, wear your mask. Get in line. Accept the fact that all white people are racists and there's nothing that you can do to convince us otherwise. And because you're white, you have to admit that your whiteness is racist in itself. Your whiteness is systemically racist. There is this need, this direct pressure, because people are afraid of becoming marginalized and becoming outcast and being thrown into the out group. It also creates a state of fear because people are afraid to be seen as disloyal or treacherous. Okay? A pressure to express arguments against any of the administration's actions are put down, and I'm going to go back to King George II, President George H. Bush, the second President Bush, and this was right after 9/11. He said, you are either for us or you're against us, or you have a whole lot of oil, and we're not going to condemn you. Terrorism is evil, and we have to fight and we have to combat terrorism. But so you want to crush any dissenters, because anybody that dissents or anybody that questions the narrative cannot be allowed to continue. So how extremism occurs. Here are our theories. And I want to start, well, let's start with my favorite. And I don't know, there might be a slide here in a little bit, but I still have 13 slides to go. So we're going to be going along with this lecture. My favorite philosopher, Yoda, said that fear brings anger, anger brings hate, hate brings suffering for everybody. The first theory that brings about extremism and hate is and can be linked to Karl Marx, Willem Bonner, and Richard Queenie, and the critical social conflict theory, the racial conflict theory, feminist conflict theory, all of these conflict theories. But it all establishes around 4 classes of people. The elite. And the elite is the upper 1% of the population. The upper classes, which is the top 10% of any society. The middle class, which is about the 35%, and then the working poor. Extremism is created through a conflict between these groups, between the haves and the have-nots. Okay? It's created between a world to where the rich have everything. So the 99% want their fair share. Like Occupy Wall Street said, we are the 99%. We are oppressed, and we're being oppressed by the elite. Okay, the upper class would be big business. The big business owners and the wealthy, not the billionaires, but the millionaires. And so the lower 90% want this, that, and the other thing, and they want what the upper class has, and they will fight for it. The working poor, okay. So the lower 55%, which is the majority of the world, the working people, the people that Karl Marx and William Bonner led to, and wanted. Okay? They create this state of fear. Okay, and the fear of loss is the path to the dark side. So we have created this world, we have created this fight between those that have and those that have not. Those that have not, gender, racial, ethnic, religious, sexual orientation, gender identification, on and on. I can sit there and they identify and they say, okay, well, the haves, the whites, the rich, the business owners, the elitists, those people that are in this place have all of this, and I want it, and they won't let me have it because I'm black, because I'm a woman, because I'm gay, because I'm a pedophile, because I'm transgendered, because I'm this, that, or the other. So this creates a level of resentment with the have-nots towards the haves. So they are going to resort and they're going to do whatever they can do to get that which the haves have. Now the haves don't want to lose what they have. And they don't want to lose the things that make their lives comfortable. So they're going to fight against the have-nots. And this is going to create, again, two in-groups. Okay, so the have-nots are an in-group, the haves are an in-group that are fighting over power. They're fighting over power for control. They're fighting over power for haves. They're fighting for power of resources or the control of resources. And this fear of loss, loss of position, loss of income, the loss of employment, the loss of hope, creates this world where we marginalize those people who are not in our group. And it causes the outgroup to attach or to resort to extremism and violence so that they can achieve those things that they want and what they need. So with an uncertain or an uncertainty of the future is where the individual right here is centered on the worries about their future and all the bad things that they can anticipate happening. You can leave your feelings, you can leave your feelings of hopelessness and depression about the days ahead behind you because you've got this group, you've got these other people that will embrace you and accept you for who you are. And then as a group, you exaggerate the scope of the problems that you face. For example, the white people are privileged, and because I am a person of color, I will never achieve, I can never equal that which the white person has because of the color of my skin. So you resort to violence and extremism because you believe you're a victim. Then on the other side, the haves, the white community, are being called racists. They're being called white supremacists. They're being called systemically racist. So they look for people who will support them and encourage them because they believe they've worked hard for everything that they have. We're not talking about the 1% that lives on a silver spoon and they have everything handed to them. You see how I did that? Now I'm isolating the 1%, the billionaires, the Bill Gates, and the, we'll just call them Bill Gates, and the Faucis, and the Obamas, and the Rockefellers, and the Rothschilds, and the finance guys. Okay, if you have an uncertainty of your future and you have no hope for the future, or your hope for the future is being destroyed, you're going to be forced, you're going to be pushed into the waiting arms of an extremist group. And they're going to support you, they're going to encourage you, and they're going to allow you and encourage you to resort to violence. You know, we saw this all last summer with the 2020 Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots. And we saw it on January 6th with the right-wing Trump won riots. Both of these riots were just as bad as the other. Okay. But depending on which group you're listening to, one was to promote justice, equality, and the American way, and safety and future, where the opposing groups are saying, look at this, it's insurrection, it's hate, it's racism, it's filled with violence, and it needs to be crushed, and it needs to be stopped. So let's move to the next one. And this one is social structure or strain theory, brought to us by Robert Merton. And he gives credit to Emil Durkheim. And social structure is the framework of a society that is laid out before we're born. Okay, this social contract establishes your social status, your roles, the groups within the structure, the institutions within the structure. And each one of these components play out a different action or different pressures upon you as an individual, and how we behave within the framework of this being created. So let's just call this the American dream. Okay, the American dream is, or the axioms of the American dream, is that we must all strive for wealth. We must achieve this level of standard of quality of living that is outside of the poverty level. But once we meet those goals, we are met with, or once we meet these individual goals, we want to reset those goals for a 25% increase. Okay, we want to strive to leave generational poverty. Okay, and I'll tell you here, and I'm going to repeat Ben Shapiro, and I'll give credit to Ben Shapiro here. But you know, if you want to get out of poverty and you want to defeat generational poverty, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of the God that you serve, regardless of the people that you love, regardless of all of the things that we see in the conflict theory that says that you can't achieve because you are a member of this marginalized group of people. The American dream says that if you want to leave generational poverty, you must finish your education, you must get a job, you must maintain a job, and don't have kids out of wedlock. We're not rabbits. Okay? When you have children that you want to have. I'm not suggesting abstinence is the policy. I'm saying birth control is the policy. Abortion is not an approved birth control method. The questions and the answers on birth control is another topic for another day. But the narrative of birth control also creates extremism. Don't have kids out of wedlock. Because once you have kids out of wedlock, it makes finishing your education and keeping a job all that much harder. Failure in the American dream, failure is not failure unless you give up and you quit trying. Failure is an obstacle on the road to success. Okay, so if you fail, try again. If you fail, try again. If you fail again, try again, and on and so forth, until you find out that successful method or that successful way that you want to be. So the adaptations to the social structure, there's five. There's 5 adaptations. The first is conformity. And conformity is where you accept the approved goals and the approved methods. Okay, so you accept these three axioms to get out of generational poverty. Okay, you finish your education, you get a job, you keep a job, and then you don't have kids outside of wedlock. And this is conformity. This is how you go about achieving the American dream. The second is innovation. You accept the approved goals, but you want to find a different way to achieve them. We'll use Bill Gates as an example. Bill Gates is a multi-gazillionaire. Okay, Bill Gates dropped out of college his freshman year, or at least that's the story. And now he runs and he owns Microsoft and Windows, and he's a multi-gazillionaire, and he never finished college. And I don't know that he's gone back to college, because why go to college? He's a computer expert. He's a computer software expert that's made millions of dollars. He innovated, and innovation is the engine to capitalism. You want to get out of poverty, and you don't think conforming to the way that that's been accepted to get out of poverty. Innovate a new way. You know, find a new way to become wealthy and rich. Then there's ritualism. Ritualism is abandoning society's goals. Okay, we're abandoning the dream itself, and then conforming to the approved means. Okay, Tom Cruise was a movie in All the Right Moves back when he first started. I don't know if All the Right Moves was before or after The Outsiders, but he was a starring role in this movie. And he got a scholarship to college, and he was going to go to college. He was going to get a degree, and he wanted to become a lawyer, and he wanted to do all this stuff. And he was going to use football as a way to do that. And his friends and his brothers said, "What are you doing? Why are you chasing this dream? Why do you even want this dream? You know, do you think you're better than us? Do you think that you are too good for us? Your uncles worked in that mine. Your brothers work in that mine. Your dad works in that mine. Your grandfather works in that mine. Everybody has worked in that mine. Why do you think that you are special? Why do you think that you are above the rest of us? Why are you so arrogant?" You know, and this ritualism, you know, I've seen it in my life from my friends. You know, I was in the Air Force, and I was a crew chief, and you know, I finished high school, and when I got out of the Air Force, I wanted to go to college, and my friends, you know, the people that, you know, I considered as my best friends, said, "Who do you think you are? Do you think that you're smarter than us?" There's one friend even still today. You know, "Why are you always throwing your resume in our face? Do you think you're smarter than us? Why do you think you're better than us?" And on and on and on and on. I've blocked him on all of my social media except for YouTube. So maybe he'll watch this, and yeah, he'll know who he is. This ritualism stagnates the American dream. It deflates innovation. Although it conforms to the approved goals, it denounces the dream itself. Then you have retreatism. Retreatism abandons the approved goals and the approved means. They isolate themselves. They say, "You know what? I am just not going to participate in this race anymore." Okay? They are, you know, they become minimalists. They don't want to chase the American dream. They don't want that 4-bedroom house with the picket fence and the in-ground pool and all of the benefits and the glory that come with all of the home ownership. And, you know, they don't chase the education. You know, they do whatever they need to do to survive, but they're not going to chase the goals or the dreams or the approved means. The last is rebellion, and this is where we challenge the goals. Okay, we've seen the rebellion in this critical race theory thought and idea where the American dream is only for the white people, that the African American, the Black, Indigenous people of color will never be able to achieve the goals or the means because we're oppressed. So we need to go take it. And they're going to take it through violence. And the white supremacists say, we will never be able to achieve what we want to achieve. So we're going to go take it. The Unite the Right rally was about fighting back against the Black Lives Matter movement and the Antifa movement, because they're told that they can't achieve the goals and that the approved goal, the American dream, is wrong and it's racist. So these people are going to fight back. And this is what happens within the social structure. Okay, the next policy is the self-fulfilling prophecy. And this just goes on and on and on and around and around and around. Actions by state A are based on expected behaviors. Then the expectations by state B of the reactions of state A create the actions of state B, which is reflected by the actions of state A, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, let's get this all into reality. A positive and negative expectations about circumstances, events, or people affect that person's behavior towards them in a manner that he or she creates in the situation. Okay, so you create the situation, you create the narrative, you give this expectation of results, and then it happens because that's what you're expecting to see. Self-fulfilling prophecies is about a worldview. Joseph Goebbels stated that if you tell a lie often enough, it will become the truth because that's what the people will want to see. Okay, any dissenting voices is silenced. Any argument against the lie will be silenced because we want the lie to be believed. We want to believe that African Americans are an oppressed people and that they'll never achieve what whites achieve because they're Black. Okay, that sounds like a white supremacist narrative to me. But it's not a well, it is a white supremacist narrative to me. White people gain because they're white. Black people can't because they're Black. And they never will because they're Black. That sounds like a white supremacist narrative. But it's not a white supremacist narrative. It's the narrative of critical race theory. It is the narrative of Michelle Alexander and Cornel West and Black Lives Matter and the liberal left. It's aversive racism. Not so much because the voices that are saying this are not white supremacists. The voices that are saying this are Black, Indigenous, people of color, and their allies. It turns every situation, critical race theory, worldviews, and self-fulfilling prophecies, turns every situation into an in-group, out-group fight that we can't get over, that we can't overcome, because this narrative is the narrative that has to stand forth, and it has to stand in front. And as long as it stands in front, we as a society are lost. So, differential association is my next and my last theory. Differential association theory was originally brought to us by Edwin Sutherland. And Edwin Sutherland is, in my opinion, and in some textbooks, you're going to find that Edwin Sutherland is the father of modern criminology. Okay, do not get him confused with the father of criminology, Cesar Beccaria or Cesar Beccaria, or however you want to pronounce his Italian name. I pronounce it Cesar Beccaria. Okay, Cesar Beccaria is the father of criminology, but Edwin Sutherland is considered the father of modern criminology, and he had a theory on white collar crime, which I may be teaching a class on that in the spring. I may not. I don't know. If I do, you'll see more lectures on white collar crime. You'll hear a whole lot more about Edwin Sutherland and his theories on white collar crime versus street crime or differential association. Okay, differential association, as brought by Edwin Sutherland, also has 9 categories and 9 main principles. And I'm not going to go into all 9 principles here today because I'm already an hour and 15 minutes and, you know, I'm too long already. But it is important that you understand that through differential association, criminal behavior and extremism, specifically extremism, is a behavior that is learned from intimate personal groups. Okay. Extremism through differential association, through the theory brought to us by Edwin Sutherland, we learn extremism. And we learn extremism by the people that we associate with. Okay, and this learning includes the techniques for committing crime, for the motives, for the rationalizations, for the attitudes of extremist behavior, of joining a hate group, how you turn around and you use your extremism to force your attitudes, to force your policy changes upon the rest of society and the rest of the community. The specific direction and motives and drives are learned from definitions within the legal code as favorable or unfavorable. You know, a person becomes a delinquent, becomes an extremist because of an access of definitions that are favorable to breaking the law. If your behaviors, your actions favor breaking the law, those people that you look up to promote breaking the law, breaking conformity to society, you will become an extremist. So extremism, in conclusion, extremism and hate are learned behaviors. You are not born to be an extremist. You are not born to be a hater. You're not born to join hate groups. You're not born to commit hate crime. You are taught. You are bred into this type of behavior. You're encouraged through reward and punishment. As long as you're repeating and you are part of the choir and you're singing the words of the choir and the accepted narrative of the in-group, you are rewarded. If you bring in a dissenting voice or you are a dissenting voice of an out-group, you are attacked and you are punished. People who feel fear, lack hope, and have nothing to lose will be recruited by the extremist groups and will become extremists. Once you have taken away all of the hope and all of the dreams for the future of an individual, he is going, or she, or they, them, it's, whatever your personal pronoun is, your preferred personal pronouns are, whatever they are, once you have marginalized that individual and you've taken away that individual's personal significance and you have outcast them, you have cast them out into the fringes of society, they will become an extremist and you will be responsible for the crime and the actions and the activities that they bring forward. Extremist groups provide a sense of belonging, a sense of hope, a sense of significance to those people who have been marginalized by the larger society. When you cancel a person's voice, you create an extremist. When you silence a dissenting voice, you create an extremist. When you do these things, you become responsible for extremism. You become responsible for creating hate within society, for creating extremism in society. All of this name calling and all of this vitriol that we find within social media. And I'm sure I'm going to find some in the comments on my YouTube channel if this article finds itself staying on YouTube for very long. And you can make your comments below as you deem necessary. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this through my learning platform at school, you can also make comments below. So I hope that this extended lecture has helped you become more familiar, or more understanding, or give you a greater understanding of racism, of extremism, of hatred, and how the polarization of extremist groups and the rhetoric that we're seeing today is doing nothing but creating extremism. I hope you have a pleasant day. I hope you have a great weekend or week or whenever you're watching this. And I hope that you open your eyes, open your mind, open your heart to the dissenting voice so that you don't become a member of groupthink or you don't create an extremist.